Welcome to the Community ROI podcast. Here, senior community experts, founders, and C-level managers tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how community impacts business growth. By listening to these conversations, you'll get actionable steps on how to connect community goals with business goals to skyrocket business growth while still bringing extreme value to community members. My name is Yurii. I help people and brands shine through communities and personal connections. And my guest is Erica Hanson, who doesn't just build communities, but builds movements at global scale. From spending 17 years at Google scaling developer programs to millions of people worldwide, to leading DevRel and community at FlutterFlow with millions of users, she's been at the center of what it really takes to turn users into advocates, always combines strategy with empathy, and knows exactly how to connect community with product growth and real impact. So, welcome, Erica.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Very happy that we are connected. Shout out to Ruthie. Thank you, Ruthie, for connecting
Thank
us.
you, Ruthie.
And can't wait to learn more and more and more about your story, because you definitely have a ton of experience firsthand, this practical one. So let's start with a question. What is one community activity that you enjoy the most and why?
My favorite community activity is going to meetups that are led by community leaders around the world. And I did at Google and also at FlutterFlow, we had community programs that my colleague Mano and I started there. And what I love is just going to a meetup. These are happening everywhere. I'm thinking of one meetup in New York. We had a FlutterFlow developer group in New York run by Nick. He's an amazing community leader. And what I love is just meeting other people who are building in FlutterFlow, and I could just get to know the community and ask them questions. And I would just ask, what brought you to this event? What are you building? What are some of the challenges? And I just wanted to get to know their story. And one person really stood out. He would drive 2.5 hours from Connecticut to get to Manhattan to come to these events. And he went to most of them. And there was one event where everyone was just co-working and built. And that was actually one of the most successful events. It's like, bring your project. Let's build together, show people what you're building, ask questions. There's FlutterFlow staff there. And that was really fun because you could see what people were building. And I thought it was just so cool that he would drive 2.5 hours to get to these events. So there was value for him. And we loved, hearing about what he was building, how he was doing. And so I think events like that, meetups where you could get to know the community organizer better, and also where you can get to know the members, hear their stories, understand how they're using the product to build, how it's impacting them, and getting feedback that's really what energizes me the most. And the same at Google. I loved going to events around the world. I lived in Singapore for a period of time, so it's like a meetup in the Philippines to Indonesia. It's like, what was common was just awesome community leaders who wanted to help people learn and grow as developers, and building together, meeting them, hearing their stories. Across both companies, it was just the same. It was the people meeting and learning together. And that's really what energizes me the most. And that was the activity I love the most, was the meetups.
Going to the event as a host and as a participant is a little bit different, because when you are as a host, you have a lot of responsibility. You have to ensure that everyone is happy, that everything is going on in the right way. And when you are a participant, you just enjoy the show. So I'm curious, when you were going to those events, were you going as a participant or as a co-host?
Yeah, in those particular events, I was a bit more of a co-host in a way. It was really led by the community leader. So it was up to them to come up with the content. But I did support with the space and just making sure, checking people in and making sure things were running well. So I was more of a supporter. I would say a little bit more of like a volunteer staff sort of role, and just supporting the leader, making sure they had everything they needed to have a successful event. And so, yeah, it was more of that role. But even it is what I really like now this year. One thing I'm focused on the personal side is becoming a member of more communities and just joining as a participant. and I'm going to more of those events. And I love that role as well, just going to events and learning and just there to network. And like last week, I was a participant of a community-led growth event in New York, and that's where I saw Ruthie and others. And I loved being just a participant, and I could just, soak in the information and learn from other people. But also, I appreciated the organizers and what they did, because I've also been a host and organized events myself. But in those kind of examples with the FlutterFlow meetup in New York, I was more of I would say like a volunteer and supporting them.
When you are creating a community-led event, how does it help business to grow?
So at FlutterFlow and at Google, I think one great thing about community, we would find community champions who are already using the products, who are already building, who are already passionate, and just talking to them, interacting with them, getting feedback from them was so helpful. Just passing that feedback back to the product teams, and that just makes the product better. And then they would give us feedback. So it's really the feedback loop was one thing that it ties to business goals. They would tell us, hey, in this workshop I was running, people were struggling with this, and we realized, okay, there's some issues with onboarding, or maybe there's more documentation or videos that would be helpful for onboarding. And so that kind of feedback is helpful, just seeing where the members of their community are getting stuck in workshops. And so one is a feedback loop to the product teams. And the second thing is just a way of reaching more people and having them learn about the product. And especially if they're already building in Android, for example, just letting them know, here's what's new in Android, or here's some tips that'll help your workflow. Because at Google, overall, our goal was just success. We wanted the developers to be successful in using the products they were already using. So we wanted to make sure that they had the information they needed, that they can build together. So that would increase engagement as well. But one specific thing we would track is number reach. And the other thing too is just creating a pool of community advocates that are just advocating already, and we just are recognizing them, and they were already doing this. They're already maybe making YouTube videos or posting or running events naturally. But this just kind of gives them that badge of like, hey, I was selected by this company, and we give them, branding and resources, and we support them and try to recognize them, and then support them in running these sort of events. So then we have this network of advocates who are just further talking about amplifying, evangelizing the product. So those are a few of the ways that it then ends up impacting the business.
What's your definition of a community for business?
Yeah, I would say for community, it's really a gathering of people, and that could be in person or virtual. I have more experience in the in-person space. And so it's a gathering of people, and it's around a specific, basically around a specific purpose, or just an activity or something that they're interested in. And when you bring in the business piece, it's usually around the product. It's like people are already building in FlutterFlow, for example, and so you're just bringing them together. That's kind of the shared interest or shared purpose. But then with a specific goal, it's making it measurable, and you're tracking stuff you have a specific action you want them to take, whether it's trying out the product for the first time, so it's like a new user, or maybe it's just engagement, and continuing to stay active with it, or reach is something that we would track for both companies, like number of people reached. And then we would just build plans around that and activities around achieving those specific goals. And so we had, different ways of trying to encourage that.
There are a lot of businesses that are talking about community, and it doesn't mean that everyone understands this. Some people think that community will solve all their problems, and if they're doing a shitty product, somehow community magically will do everything better. And I'm curious, do everyone needs a community?
I don't think that everyone needs a community. I think it's good. I mean, I think community is amazing. And I do think hopefully any product has existing champions. So there is a way to engage with them, but you might not necessarily need a community. I think it is good to ask the question. And that's something that we did at FlutterFlow. Because my assumption was like, oh, they're gonna the existing build users. There, I think when I joined, there were 1.5 million user signups. I assume they would want an in-person community program, but I was like, why am I assuming that? Let's ask them. So we added that into a quarterly community survey that would already go out, and we said, hey, if there was a meetup in your city, would you go meet up in person? And it was over 70% that said, yes, I would go. And then there was another drop down. Okay, which city are you in? And a lot, it was, London, Paris, New York were the most common cities. So we said, all right, so there is an interest. Quite a few people filled the survey out, and we have these top cities. So we started in those cities first. So that was just a check to say, like, okay, people do want to meet in person. And then we saw that naturally people were already gathering. There were already events happening in Japan. I know there were events or people were already running FlutterFlow meetups. So it's like, all right, let's just support them or have a program around it and provide them some resources and get them on a call where we can all talk about any challenges they're facing in their community, and they could meet each other and just say, like, here's how I'm running an event, how are you doing it, and just share insights with each other and support each other. So I think it's important to not assume and ask the question. And then the second thing is, it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. You need somebody who really cares about the people, who wants to have conversations with these champions to understand what do they need. And how do you build a sustainable community program where it's not set it and forget it? Hey, run these events. And it's like, no, you got to find people who already love the product, but you want to support them and thank them and recognize them. So it's important to have somebody on your side who can communicate with these community builders and support them and recognize them.
Community is a long game, and sometimes when
Yes.
you start building a program, you can't usually get some quick results. You have to spend some time, and then you're growing up, and that's why I think that sometimes survey are very tricky things, because you can ask people and they will tell you yes, and then nobody showed up. So I'm curious, from your
True.
experience, what was the difference, or maybe a percentage of people who said yes, they would like to come, and who really showed up?
That's a great point, because people usually, even me, sometimes I'm like, oh, I definitely want to do that. And then when it comes time to going and getting out of the house and taking the subway, I'm like, oh, and it's cold outside. It's like, do I want to do that? Yeah, that's a great point. We ended up, we weren't able to track exactly how many out of the people who filled out the survey, but we ended up the events, we were able to see number of we used Meetup as a platform to host events. I know that they're also using Luma now, and with that we could see number of members in those communities. And I think when I left there was maybe 20,000 members. So and that was far more than filled out the survey. So it was, yeah, we were able to see, how many people joined as members in the Meetup group, and the events had, some of them had quite a few people, especially in India. There would be, 100, 200 people at some of these events, meetups after work. So it was great to see that there were a lot of people who wanted to meet in person, and then they'd bring a friend, and then just kind of had a ripple effect. So we did end up seeing quite a lot of people. There's some cities that were a little tougher than others to gather folks. Like I'd say, like some cities like Los Angeles, for example, you have to drive really far to get places. So, maybe there's not as many people that go to those events, but for the people that do go, they get a lot of value out of the events. I grew up in Los Angeles, so I know how you have to drive everywhere and there's a lot of traffic. But in some cities like New York, there was always a lot of people, and it kind of depends on the city and country. But yeah, there were a lot of people ended up joining, becoming members, and going to the events.
Give me an example of a memorable experience that you've had with one of the community you worked with that you loved personally as a human and that also helped to achieve some of the business goals.
Yeah, one of my favorite memories was when I first started working on the Google Developer Student Clubs program. So these are community groups, but at the university level. And I was the global program leader of this program and helped build it and scale it. It existed in India, and I piloted the program in Indonesia and then was able to grow it globally. And when I was first piloting it in Indonesia, I selected 20 students, and this was just the pilot group to see, like, hey, should our team take this on? Is this an impactful program? And are students even interested in becoming community leaders on their campuses and running meetups about Google's developer products? And one of them, so after I selected those 20, it was so cool to see them hosting really cool events on their campuses. Folks were learning, like, students wanted to build Android apps. Android is quite popular in Indonesia. And so there was just seeing that moment of like, hey, I'm building something. I built an app, and now, this is something. Then they were entering into hackathons and getting really engaged. And some students are like, wow, now I want to get into, now I want to be a CTO. One of the students told me. So once we had those 20 students, we expanded to 60 students. And the most memorable moment was running a summit, a gathering that I hosted, and we all gathered in Bali in Indonesia. And it was really just like a lot of these students are new to community building, but they were interested in already building in Google developer products like, Android, Firebase. And so just gathering them together, running like community building trainings, like, hey, here's how you build a community. You have to have a purpose, a way of how are you going to promote the event? What kind of people do you want to focus on at your university? And just seeing them think through, like, okay, how do I make an impact in my community? How do I help other students learn and grow as developers? And a lot of them are motivated by jobs later. They're like, how do I become more job ready after college? And their members were saying, how do we become more job ready? We want to build a portfolio. And just seeing them, like, learn about how to build their communities and get excited about how they can support students. And some of those students from that first 20 that I met in person at that summit, I've stayed connected to them. One student, Isfa, he's now a Google developer expert. Like he got really deep into like Google Cloud and Android, and continued to, be an advocate for Google's developer products. And he eventually helped write the curriculum for a mobile development class at his university. He's hosted a number of workshops and events and just helps other people learn and build on Google's developer platforms. And he's still doing that. And I still check in with him every once in a while. So those are some of the stories where I'm like, wow, I met him in 2017, and he's still an advocate of, and he's still building in, Google's developer products and helping other people learn and grow and be successful and build cool apps. So that was the most memorable event, the summit, but then meeting these students who continue to advocate and be successful in their own right, and now are managing engineering teams at unicorn startups in Indonesia. So it's really cool to hear their journey and stories.
Now it sounds like product development and adoption and also product advocate as a business goal, and sometimes it's hard to really see so far forward. So 2017 is like 9 years ago. I believe that you definitely didn't have a metric to track like 10 years from now. So I'm curious, what were the main metrics that you tracked back then?
Yeah, back then it was number reached. We already had the Google Developer Groups program that was for professional developers, and these were communities around the world. There were about 1,000 of those in 140 countries. And then this student clubs program that I was directly leading, eventually we got to 2,000 clubs in 110 countries, and reaching 1.8 million students per year after, by the time I left Google. So at the time, the metric was number reached, and that was just like awareness and people in a room learning, and that was self-reported by the students and by the community leaders. Number reached. We also looked at percentage of communities that were active, like hosting events regularly, and we had a metric around that. And if folks weren't running events, we were just checking in, like, how can we support you? Are there resources you need, or are there some blockers? Sometimes it was getting a venue, so we would see if we can support with getting a venue. And so those were the metrics we were looking at the time. We weren't as much looking at, we didn't have metrics around revenue or even product adoption, although for specific initiatives, I did track product adoption for some of the things that I ran, like the solution challenge project competition. So yeah, the main thing was number reach, but in the background, I was thinking, I was hoping that the people who would join the program would stay engaged and eventually join other programs that we had, like become a Google Developer Group leader after they graduate, or maybe they become a Google Developer expert. But that would be 10 years kind of thing. And I had that in my mind, that I want to stay in touch with these students and hear what they do next. Like, some of them would get jobs at other tech companies and not build in Google anymore. But I was so happy to hear that too. I was like, okay, they're in the tech industry and they're successful and managing a team now at this other company. Like, I really just wanted them to be successful in learning and building, and some of them would continue on to become experts on the Google side, or would join other companies but still be successful. But this was part of a small part of that journey, and that was really exciting to me.
Now, what I can hear through all the things that you are sharing is like human connections, long term. So I'm curious, like, what is your backstory of bringing so much attention and interest specifically to building these long-term human relationships and connections within the community?
Yeah, part of my motivation is my dad, Larry. He's an example of a long-lasting community because he's been part of the same tech community for over 40 years. It's called ISACA. It's basically a community for IT auditors, folks interested in cybersecurity. And so this is his main activity. All he talks about is ISACA, and he's an introvert, but has stayed involved with this community. And now 40 years later, he's retired, but this is his main activity, is being part of ISACA. And when I think of what does a great community look like, I think of ISACA, Los Angeles, because they have created this sense of belonging where even my dad, who's an introvert, has become so involved, so engaged, and stayed even after retirement. And I asked him, why did you go to your first event? And he said, I had a work question I had to get answered. And he doesn't remember if it got answered, but he stayed. And I was like, why did you stay? And he just started participating more. He would just become an active member. Eventually, he became a volunteer, just helping out with some stuff. He became a speaker. And eventually, he said he got roped into being the president. I think because he was always there and just so engaged. They're like, please be the president. So he's the president for a while. And now he's still a volunteer. He goes to the meetings, and there's like a volunteer thank you gathering every year that he looks forward to. And so I think another reason why he stayed is not only the community, they created a sense of belonging, and second, he became very active. He was an active participant that kept him engaged. And third was, I guess this is also related to belonging. Like the people are just so warm. And when I organized a surprise 70th birthday for my dad, on a whim, I said, let me just reach out to the president of the community and see if any of them want to come. She's like, we love Larry. I was like, oh, really? That's great. And so she invited, there were like 12 of them, or 13 of them that joined and came to his surprise birthday party. And so that was just really amazing to see the other volunteer leaders who were there to support him. And also, I've been to events with my dad as well. I went to their holiday event end of last year. I've spoken at a couple of their virtual events. So now I'm involved in this community. There's kind of a space for all of us. And my dad has gotten jobs for people through that. People have given him support as well. So it's just like a very supportive community, and people have gotten jobs through it, and they really want people to succeed. So to me, that's like a blueprint of a successful, long-lasting community is ISACA, just keeping people engaged, making them feel welcome, helping them out, and welcoming their kids like me, and keeping the feeling of the community going. So it's just all positive vibes, and it's been a great motivation for me.
What is the one lesson or maybe some process or system or something that you took from ISACA communities that you use in your professional journey?
Yeah, one thing is focusing on the members. And one thing I've encouraged, I've led some of the trainings for the community leaders. And I always call out, I say, look for the Larrys. And, even people who might not be so proactive or maybe more introverted, or just think who seems engaged, and ask them if they want to help out with your event with the registration, or if you learn that someone is an expert on the topic, encouraging them to take the stage and be on a panel or speak. Because sometimes they're like, oh, I don't know, I haven't spoken about this topic yet. So finding like the next generation of speakers and encouraging them to take the stage. And some of them have done like quick lightning talks, like, hey, just share something for a few minutes, and just to get some of the members to share some of their insights. So one thing I took from that is encouraging the leaders to think about the members, and creating ways for them to be active participants. They don't all need to be volunteers, but just think of ways to keep them engaged, and make us and get feedback from them too. I always tell them, like, feedback is a gift. It can be tough. I run events now. And sometimes if you see something negative, it's like, oh no, but it's like, no, the feedback really helps, like, so that you can create better events that people want to participate in and come back to. So I'd say telling them to focus on the members is one of the bigger lessons.
No, it's the best thing that you mentioned, focusing on people, and also inviting community members to speak up and encouraging them, because you reminded me, like, my professional journey when I started with community for SEO expert, for marketing expert, for sales experts, and I never went out for some stars. And I always was trying to rise stars within the community, because they were all experts, and even though they didn't have some speaking experience, they have professional experience. And then I created some materials and stuff to share with them, like how to create a presentation, how to deliver a speech, and all the things. And the best part that that stays close to my heart, I remember that people who started in our professional communities, like doing the speaking engagement, they were invited afterwards to industry conferences. And I was like, oh, I know this person. I know where this person had the first speaker experience. And it's always very, very nice that, seeing that out of this community, people started, people became highlighted, and they became the stars that people who are not even in the industry, they kind of go and learn from them. Or some people, some newcomers, they're always, go and see them. So I totally get what you are talking about. And coming back to the teams, because once again, community cannot be alone. It always is connected to other teams. So I'm curious, from your experience, what are 3 teams that you usually work with the most when build a community, and how does community impact them?
Yeah, at Google, the teams that I worked with the most one was the product teams. So these were especially for specific products, like the Android team, and these were like the developer advocates and some of the engineers. And that was an important team because we were wanting to give the content to the community organizers to host meetups about these products, and sometimes we were able to give feedback back to these teams. I especially worked with them on the solution challenge. It was a project competition, and it was a moment where we encouraged the students to build something that solves for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we encouraged them to use more than one product. So oftentimes they'd use Android and Firebase to build something that was like a flood alert app was one from Indonesia that I loved, and actually the first winner was a vaccination tracker app in Uganda, and that student ended up building the product they built. They ended up being able to hire someone, and they worked with a hospital, and that hospital actually started using that. So in a case like that, we would work with the product team to get some content, and we'd also have them judge the competition as well, especially for the like Android, for example. They would judge, what are some of the best projects. But then we'd work with the marketing team as well to, like, for the student in Uganda who made the vaccination tracker app, we had the marketing team wrote a blog post about that. For the flood alert app, we worked with there was a team called Google Developer Studio that helped us produce the video, and then the marketing team would help us kind of share that story out. So we would work with the product teams, the marketing teams, and in Indonesia specifically, I worked with the policy teams, the PR teams as well, to just amplify some of these stories. And we were hoping that would inspire more people to join these communities, but also see that they can build something cool too that impacts their communities. And so that impacted business goals, at least, especially in Indonesia. It's like, okay, let's show that people are able to upskill and build and learn through these communities, and they can build some cool things, and then they can, build apps that impact others around them. And at FlutterFlow, I worked a lot with the product and engineering teams, especially. We would surface feedback we were hearing, or if there were any bugs that were coming up, we would surface that to the product teams. And so we worked a lot with them, or we could connect them to the product teams, just if they would have like feature requests, which they usually do. And so that feedback loop was helpful in just improving the product and figuring out where are people stuck, and just improving things from there. I did work with the marketing team as well, and it was similar to what we'd had at Google, which was amplifying stories, sharing on social media some of these stories. And oftentimes the community leaders would post on LinkedIn, here's an event we did, and we would like repost and share that. And so those were 2 of the teams that we worked with the most. It's usually marketing and product teams, and it would help them just in a similar way, like improving the product, seeing where people are kind of stuck, and then also a way to generate more awareness on the marketing side, and telling more stories to encourage other people to join and also share what they're building.
No, it's very easy when people, especially leadership and stakeholders from other team, already see the impact of community. And sometimes it's not that easy, especially when you start some new initiative. So I'm curious, how to get leadership on board and invested when community is not an overnight success.
Yeah, it does take a while. And even at Google, it took a while to convince leadership and also my teammates that, hey, we should really grow this Google Developer Student Club program. There was we already had the Google Developer Groups program running, and so there were meetups being hosted around the world, and so they weren't sure about an additional program. My teammates were busy. They're like, oh, so a few of them said, I don't have the bandwidth to take on another program. I don't know what the value is yet. Part of that was also the audience of students, and should we have a program focused on them? And so that's why I ran that pilot program in Indonesia. And I did believe that we should have a separate program that catered more to students and we could support them a bit more. And them trying out the products earlier, maybe they would then use those products later when they're thinking of like how they want to build something and considering something that they had built in college. So that was part of the messages, and also just one way of showing the value is sharing some of the individual stories of like, okay, this person learned and they built something cool and then they got hired. And then some of the longer term stories were, okay, now they're a Google developer expert and speaking at events about, Android or Google Cloud. And so showing some of the stories and also showing the early reach of like, okay, there's interest and people are wanting to join these events. So I think like piloting and showing the impact of that pilot is one thing. Showing early human stories was another. I used some budget to film some videos, so that was like visual. And then having success in a few countries and really doing well in those countries, then some of my teammates in other regions were like, oh, cool, the program seems to be working well. And then they were more interested in joining and scaling the program. So it was a bit of a process. It took some piloting. It took some like early success in some places to then expand from there. But yeah, it was a bit of a journey.
That's how it always works. Some of the previous guests told that at some point when you just start, no team wants to take community pilots and try things. But the moment one team is starting to winning of the community, everyone wants that. Everyone wants to connect to the success. So I totally get what you're talking about. And I wish to have the sky is the limit, but time is the limit to our conversation. So the final question: what is one thing to do right away for someone struggling with identifying their community ROI?
One thing to do right away is I think it's always great to identify the champions right away if you haven't already, or even if you have, just really spending more time with the community champions, people who are already building, already advocates, already sharing, on LinkedIn or maybe making YouTube videos, and who just naturally enjoy and are building in the product. And I'd say the first thing is just really sitting down, talking to them. We did that at FlutterFlow. We spent some time when we went to Germany. We met with a couple community champions in person. I love doing that because you just can ask a lot of questions. What are you building? What are some of the challenges? And what else? How else can we support you? And you learn a lot about that, and that just helps with improving the product, improving the onboarding experience. That can just help so many other things, and figuring out other programs that we need that can support them in being more successful, but also in empowering more champions like them. So I think just like talking, the first step I would do is just talk to more of the champions and asking some of these questions. And the second thing would be focusing on maybe one, like not, there's so many things you can track. It's like can be so overwhelming. There's so many metrics. It's like just focusing on one, running some pilots and getting some early success and expanding from there. And the third and last thing would be talking to other people who are in your space. They're probably struggling with community ROI, listening to podcasts like this and just learning from other people. And you probably run into some of the same challenges and just learning from each other, sharing insights. I think that can help too.
Yeah, exactly. And to a point, when you run into the same challenges, most likely you tried something and someone else tried something else. And when you combine your powers, it's easier to get to a decision. And last but not least, name 2 people I should reach out to talk about community ROI.
One person would be Francisco Opaza. He's based in London and he runs a community for community builders, and he's amazing. I had first met him when he worked at Better Mode. He was head of growth and community there, and so he would have some great insights. He hosts a lot of really cool events for community builders. And the second person is Rochelle. I first met her at a DevRel Con. It's a developer relations conference each year. And she worked at Microsoft hosting, she worked on community programs there and is now running her own community programs for women in tech. So I've learned a lot from both of them, and they're great community builders who really care about the people.
What is one question about community ROIs that I should have asked you but didn't?
Ooh, that's a great question about community ROI. Actually, I can't think of anything. I think we discussed a lot.
It's exactly okay, because it's always a thinking process. It happens when you start somewhere and then it continues. So anytime you have some additional questions, additional thoughts, please message me on LinkedIn or anywhere, because that's exactly how you will help to grow this podcast and move this podcast forward. And I believe that all the questions that you might have, some community builders are also having, and the more we speak, the more we understand each other, the better and the easier we can move this community industry forward. And Erica, thank you so much for coming to this conversation. Once again, Ruthie, shout out to you for connecting us. And thank you for sharing your decades of experience of this human-focused connections that you are building in all those communities that you were working with, that were still human-driven and also brought a ton of extra benefits for business. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And see you in the community world. And thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about how the community can help you reach and overcome your business goals faster, let's connect on LinkedIn and talk about it. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.